Wind howls across open grass. Hoofbeats pound like a heartbeat in the dark. They called it a straight line, drawn with a steel hoof across a map that had more blank space than names. Somewhere west of St. Joseph, under a moon as thin as a knife, a boy no heavier than a sack of oats leans low over the withers of a hot, heaving mustang. The saddle creaks. The bit rings. The prairie wind peels the breath from his lips. Behind him, 2,000 miles of rumor and delay. Ahead, the Pacific world and a city that can't afford to live by yesterday's news. He rides for a promise, 10 days, ocean to river, faster than a man should dare. Faster than fear if he's lucky. In the decade after California struck gold and the Union minted another star, the American West labored under a simple, dangerous fact. Information moved too slowly. Steamers could carry letters by sea around Cape Horn or via Panama, and stage lines rattled along rough overland trails. But weeks became months, and months meant markets missed, elections misread, and lives decided by stale intelligence. A nation stretched on the rack of distance needed a miracle stitched from leather, bone, and nerve. Enter three names, spoken quiet and quick in frontier counting rooms: Alexander Majors, William Waddell, and William Hepburn Russell. Freighters first, visionaries second. They ran an outfit called the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company. Their audacious wager? Build a chain of relay posts, about 180 to 190 stations, 10 to 15 miles apart, all the way from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California. Staff them with sharp-eyed station keepers and remounts so hot they steamed in winter air. Hire riders small in frame, big in grit. Then promise the impossible, a letter from the Missouri River to the Pacific in roughly 10 days. It began in April of 1860. The route laid its spine along rivers and passes: the Platte, the Rockies South Pass, the sage and alkali of the Great Basin, the black-toothed wall of the Sierra Nevada. Riders swapped horses at swing stations, every few leagues, barely slowing to sling a leather mochila, Spanish for little sack, over a fresh saddle. 4 locked pouches called cantinas held the mail. Weight meant time, and time was the only law everyone obeyed. So letters were trimmed thin, paper lightweight, and the man on the saddle was often a teenager who barely topped 125 pounds. The pay could run $50 to well over $100 a month. Good money if a man could keep breathing to collect it. The job posting that history remembers: young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18, willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred is legend more than ledger. But if the exact phrasing wobbles, the reality does not. Riders took an oath to shun liquor on duty, keep their hands from cards and their tongues from profanity, guard the mail as sacred, and ride through whatever the frontier threw in their path. They carried not just news but proofs of a republic's reach: bank drafts, business letters, the urgent notes of families clawing across the continent to find one another again. A typical run was a lesson in living inside the next minute. You arrive at a swing station, low roof, raw timbers, a man at the door with a beard like winter brush. No words wasted. The station keeper's already got your remount saddled and throwing sparks with its hooves. You leap down, hands numb, mind tallying distances like prayer beads. 10 miles to the next adobes, 40 to the home station where another rider waits. Water at the creek if the spring isn't frozen. A low spot of ground where snow drifts in treacherous, a place to give the Mustang his head. The mochila shifts, heavy with the business of men who will never know your name. You're gone again, iron shoes biting the frozen road. Risk lived in the pockets of darkness between station lamps. Weather could turn the Platte into a sheet of rage or make a quiet draw into a white suffocating drift. Summer lightning spooked horses, winter gnawed bones. A misstep on shale, a prairie dog hole hidden by buffalo grass, and a man could vanish into the ground like a dropped coin. And then there were the human hazards: road agents smelling coin, quarrelsome strangers at lonely crossings, the frictions and outright wars that flared where lines on maps ran roughshod over homelands. Riders learned to read sign the way a gambler reads tells: the lay of sage under the wind, the silence of birds, the absence of cooking smoke where there should be some. Sometimes the mustang's ears told truths before a man's eyes could find them. Yet for all its edge, the operation had the clean logic of a ticking watch. From the eastern terminus at St. Joseph, where the river lay like a black ribbon and the rail brought mail sacks from the east, riders slashed west across the prairie, matching speed to fresh horses in each man's arc of endurance. A good mount could cover 10 miles in 40 to 50 minutes, lungs pumping like bellows, sweat salting its hide. A good rider knew when to ease and when to demand, because the next man down the line was counting on getting that mochila exactly on time. Miss a handoff, and the whole enterprise lost a step. Lose a step, and the promise, the miracle, started to look like a boast. Home stations, those longer intervals of 40 to 60 miles, offered a plate of something hot, a change of rider, a spare shirt. Some had a corner bunk, some had only a bench and the comfort of a door that latched. Station keepers kept rifles close, eyes closer. They were the skeleton of the thing, men and families who watched the horizon for a dot that grew into a savior and then passed into a memory inside of a minute. There was pride in wearing the company's small badge, though the job was short on glory and long on grit. Ask the accounts books. The Pony Express bled money even as it made legends. Ask the mail covers and the dates stamped into their corners. 10 days, sometimes less, from a river town in Missouri to the gold-touched streets of Sacramento. Ask the newspapers that grew sulky waiting on steamship schedules, and then thrilled to the idea that a nation might think and act faster than the ocean's mood. The line carried love letters and bank drafts and military orders and raw opinions on the weather, the government, and the price of flour. It carried the present tense to a place that had learned to live with the past. But that future had not arrived yet. For now there were only riders, boys who rode like men, and men who lived on the razor's edge between valor and folly, threading a continent's rough seams with the needle of a fast horse and a leather sack. In the lamplight of a station, a rider warms his hands, lifts a tin cup, and scours grit from his teeth with a swallow. His eyes are already on the door. He doesn't know that his name will survive in brittle newspaper clippings or in a ledger that lists him as lightweight, reliable. He knows only that somewhere west a woman waits to learn if the bank draft cleared, and somewhere east a father waits to read if his son has found gold or only blisters. The duty is small and infinite at once. Carry the words. When the first rider burst from St. Joseph and the crowd's cheer chased him down the street, the nation felt the hair rise on its arms. 10 days. As if time itself could be bridled. As if distance were just a bad habit. The Pony Express was born in that breath, a compact between audacity and the need to know. And every night thereafter, under a slice of moon or none at all, a hoofbeat drummed that promise into the dark. St. Joseph, Missouri wakes like a river town half caught between sleep and ambition. The Missouri is black glass, swollen with spring. A clerk snaps the brass locks on the mochila, checks the tiny scales, nods once. In the street, a horse stamps, eager. A boy, no, a rider, adjusts his cinch and tastes iron in the air. West, someone says, as if that one syllable could hold 2,000 miles. Then leather creaks, the door opens, and the day begins at a full gallop. From here the line runs like a scar the nation refused to hide. North of the Arkansas country, up the Platte where wagon ruts plow permanent grooves in sod, through Fort Kearny's flag shadow, past the lone bluffs that sailors of the prairie use as landmarks. Up toward the gentle keyhole of South Pass where the Rockies soften just enough to let a rider slip by without losing his lungs. Then the country empties into sage and salt, the Great Basin, a sea where grass fails and wind speaks its own language. Beyond that, the Sierra Nevada rises like a closed fist. Between St. Joseph and Sacramento, the company studded the land with stations, some no more than a square of logs and a door that stuck in humidity. Others whitewashed adobe with a corral that smelled of sun and manure. Swing stations every 10 or so miles to change horses. Home stations every 40 to 60 to change men. The station keeper is half hostler, half sentry. His job? Keep a remount hot, keep the chimney drawing, keep the wolves out of the hen house, and keep your face unreadable when a rider stumbles in, so spent he forgets his own name. He knows each mount like a family Bible entry. The deep-chested Kentucky mare who never refuses water. The mean-shouldered mustang who's all fight for the first mile, then smooth as a river. The Morgan Cross who anchors a winter run with a stride like a metronome. At a handoff, there's no greeting. The mochila comes off like a magician's trick and lands on fresh leather. Quirts pop, sand scatters. The old horse dances light on three good legs and a prayer while the new one explodes forward. 30 seconds is the gold standard. A full minute is an eternity. The rider's uniform is the absence of anything extra. Coat if the weather is killing, otherwise shirt sleeves. Cap drawn low, a Colt if he's lucky, a percussion revolver with 6 honest shots, and sometimes a shotgun propped in the corner at the station if things sour. He carries a few ounces of hard bread, a twist of jerky, and a tin cup that can beg water from any creek a horse will trust. In the cantinas clack letters, circulars, bank drafts, government dispatches. It's said a man can ride light if he leaves comfort behind. Out here, light is life. On a good stretch, the miles fall away like husks. 10 miles in 40 minutes with a mount that knows its own feet. Sometimes 30 minutes on ground that's baked hard and honest. The rider's eyes do not belong to him. They belong to distance. He reads the road the way a drover reads cattle, listening for off notes. Is the wind wrong in that draw? Why is that cottonwood limb freshly snapped? Who stacked those stones along the creek where stones don't belong? A jackrabbit bolts and he doesn't flinch, because it's the motion that isn't animal he's hunting. A glint that might be a rifle barrel, a stillness that might be men. Weather has its own temper. A spring squall blows up like an insult. Rain needles the eyes, mud takes the bottom out of a gallop. Rivers take the measure of the careless. The Platte can be broad and shallow and still snatch a horse like a thief. The Carson runs cold enough to shock a man's knees to stone. The rider learns the art of crossing, angled entry, slack rein, let the horse choose the line, because a horse knows water in its bones. In winter, the Laramie cuts like a blade. In summer, alkali dust coats tongues and oaths with the same chalky film. Fever hides in stagnant pools. Lightning nails fence posts drunk men couldn't hit with a carbine. And always, always the wind, a kind of doctrine enforced by the land. Night riding is another gospel. The prairie in darkness holds secrets daylight scatters. A rider learns to feel grade changes in the knees, to count hoofbeats to guess distance, to sense when a mustang's ears have locked on trouble the eye can't see. Stars are waypoints and companions both. The North Star is a steady friend. Orion drifts west and tells you time without a clock. A lantern in a station window is as tender a sight as any a frontier man will admit. When it goes out too quickly, your stomach knows the reason before your hand finds the revolver. Not every hazard crouches in the sage. The line threads homelands and hunger, pride and grievance. Some encounters end in wary stares and nothing more. Others in traded tobacco and a nod. Sometimes in anger, especially when rumors travel faster than horses and fear rides ahead of sense. The rider is not a soldier, but he moves through a geography of misunderstandings, where a wrong gesture is a spark. Most nights a man passes unmolested, because most people out here, whatever flag they'd fly if they had one, are busy staying alive. Some nights the rules change. Wages help a man forget the arithmetic of risk. $50 a month at the low end, more when the line runs thin on bodies, wages that beat many a trade east of the Missouri. There are bonuses for speed, danger pay when unrest burns along the route. But money is a poor blanket against the memories a rider collects. The time a horse stumbled in a badger hole and rolled. The time a station was ash and heat when it should have been soup and water. The time 3 shadows stepped from sage and wanted the cantinas more than they wanted to live. The company's books show losses in dollars. The rider's accounts are kept in scars and names never fully learned. Set your watch by a home station if you like. Dismount with legs made of string, laugh once because you're still alive, and pass the mochila to a man whose eyes have the same flint in them. You gulp stew that tastes of smoke and lard. Tear bread with your teeth. Let your shirt steam by the hearth. The keeper asks, "Anything on the road?" You say, "Wind out of the west." He hears more than the weather. If there's time, you rub a sore shoulder on your mount and whisper thanks. More often, you simply switch to a fresh animal and become a streak against the horizon again. The express doesn't so much run as ripple. Men and horses like muscles contracting along the nation's length. There are famous runs written in ledgers and newspapers, but there are more that live only in stories traded over whiskey. A nameless rider who outpaced a prairie fire by reading the wind in the draws. Another who let his Mustang pick a switchback through shale by moonless memory and never touched the rain. A keeper who fired 3 warning shots into night fog and convinced raiders that more rifles waited inside. Some of these tales are true as iron. Some are the kind of truth that frontier men tell to explain the size of the land that tried to swallow them. Out here, legend doesn't so much lie as it stretches to match the horizon. The Express is more than speed. It is choreography, 1,000 tiny obediences to time, a writer who trims his letters to half a page, a clerk who shaves the last ounce from the cantina, a keeper who keeps oats dry in tempers drier, a blacksmith who knows that a bad shoe can turn a promise into a funeral. Men who never met trust each other with minutes they cannot spare. If the line holds, a merchant in San Francisco prices his flour with confidence. If it fails, a governor reads yesterday's news and makes tomorrow's mistake. As the sun climbs, the country changes its face. The green prairie gives way to the ribbed flanks of the Rockies where air turns thin and words come shorter. Then the basin unrolls, sage as far as a man's eye can stand. Mirage lakes that vanish when you ride closer, jackrabbits like ghosts. Out there, a man learns to shepherd water like a priest shepherds souls. Canteens clink in the saddlebag. A horse's nostrils flare at the faintest promise of a seep. And beyond, the Sierra offers snow in June, granite that cuts clouds and passes where a misjudged step is a lifetime's regret. The westbound rider trusts the way eastbound riders have marked with hoof and habit. The line is a palimpsest of travel, each pass written over the last. When the road dips toward the Sacramento, trees return and the air grows soft again. But we're not there yet. Day's heat fattens, horseflies worry flanks. The leather of the saddle chews a man's legs raw. He rides anyway because the arithmetic never changes. Every minute saved on one link can be multiplied by a nation's need on the other end. He is a courier, yes, but also a stitch, pulling edges together before they fray. A shadow crosses the rider's face. He glances up, hawk wheeling. He grins, a quick, private thing, and leans into the next mile. Behind him, hoof prints fill with wind-blown dust as if he never existed. Ahead, a door will open and a keeper will lift a lantern. 10 days, they promised. The line holds because men hold. For now, the road is his world, the horse his ally, the mochila his oath. He rides on. By May of 1860, the line through Nevada had learned a new kind of quiet, one that made a rider press his heels into a horse's ribs and make the miles burn. It began with a door at Williams Station on the Carson River, where the frontier's stray vices had pooled too long. Accounts say the spark was ugly and personal, a Paiute elder and a young woman mistreated by men who thought distance made them kings. The house went to fire, and 4 white men died. Whatever each witness swore later, everyone agreed on the outcome. A hornet's nest torn wide, and a war summoned from rage and hunger. On May 7th, the match struck. By the 12th, volunteer militia under Major William Ormsby marched north from Carson City and met Paiute fighters near Pyramid Lake. Met them and were cut to pieces. The first battle left the militia broken and the country raw with fear. Reinforcements came with hard men and harder lessons. Colonel John Coffey, Jack Hayes, Texas Ranger turned frontier general, and Captain Joseph Stewart brought fresh volunteers and regulars, fought again near the lake, and pushed the conflict back from the settlements. In the wake of those fights, Stewart planted adobe walls on the Carson's bank and called it Fort Churchill, a permanent answer to a problem that was anything but. The fort rose fast July 20th. The first shovels, brick by brick, to guard settlers, freighters, and the most fragile thing of all, the schedule of the mail. For the Pony Express, the war felt like a hand clamped over the mouth of the line. Isolated stations that had been lonely but alive went dark. Stock run off, corrals cut, doors hanging open like broken promises. Several outposts along the Carson and across the basin saw ambush, fire, or evacuation. Riders detoured when they could, doubled runs when they couldn't, and sometimes arrived to find a building where the hearth was still warm and the keeper would never speak again. In its brief life, the Express prided itself on never breaking faith with time. In those weeks, the only recorded delays came not from snow-blind passes or flooded fords, but from war. Into that heat rode Robert Pony Bob Haslam, a London-born lightweight with a Mustang stubbornness and a face too young for its resolve. His assigned stretch ran from Friday's station at the state line over the Sierra's eastern foot to Buckland Station near the new fort. 75 miles of country that could sour from safe to fatal in the time it takes to unbuckle a cinch. One May evening, with the line rattled and nerves jumping, Haslam took the eastbound mail, expecting a relief at Buckland's. He found a rider so rattled by the talk of raiding parties that he wouldn't swing a leg over. Haslam didn't argue. He set his jaw, took the fresh remount, and promised to carry the Mokala farther, much farther, across the empty quarter to Smith's Creek, nearly 190 miles without a proper rest. The night turned the basin into a black bowl hung with stars. The road was less a road than a memory in the sage, but Haslam rode as if the trail itself answered to the oath he'd taken. At Sand Springs, the wind came knife-cold off the dunes. At Cold Springs, the silence was wrong. No dogs, no clatter of a pail, no mutter of a keeper waking. He eased his horse, slid down, and smelled smoke without flame. The station was wrecked. The keeper lay still. The cabby was gone. In another kind of service, a man might turn back. In this one, the mail turned him into momentum. He swallowed what a rider must swallow, stole minutes from grief, and put his hands on leather again. He ran east into dawn like a nail driven by a hammer he could not see. He made Smith's Creek, handed over what news can be locked in 4 small pouches, and lay down at last. 9 hours mercy on a bunk hard as principle. When he rose, he turned his horse west and rode the same country back, a mirror image stitched with danger, until Buckland's came up like an answered prayer. When the tally was put to paper, the numbers read like a boast no man would believe if the line hadn't kept its own score. Roughly 380 miles round trip in the teeth of a war, with a stop to witness what violence does to lonely places. Longest on record, they said, and the kind of courage frontier men describe by understating, he rode some. What did that mean for the enterprise? Everything and not enough. The company rerouted where it could, posted extra guards at vulnerable stations, paid danger wages, and leaned on the thin blue wall of Fort Churchill's patrols to steady the corridor along the Carson. Stewardship of the line became a kind of truce with the land and with people whose homelands the road crossed without asking. Some days the truce held, some nights it did not. In ledger books, the month's entries grew complicated. Horseflesh counted by head and hide, repairs costed in nails and timber, and labor that arrived late because men were scarce. In the East, shareholders saw numbers. In the basin, riders saw the arithmetic of fear. How many minutes could be bought with a fast remount? How many lives a lantern in a window might save? The fort itself was a statement in adobe and discipline. Regulars drilled in dust while their officers wrote reports about escorts for mail wagons and about the unsettled chemistry of a frontier suddenly crowded with claims, corrals, and laws that didn't match the ground they meant to rule. Fort Churchill's headquarters even housed a Pony Express station, proximity breeding a kind of understanding between men who rode into darkness and men who marched through it. None of it guaranteed safety. It only turned chaos into a grid you could plan against. The Paiute War cooled as summer climbed, the second battle near Pyramid Lake ending the broader raids, though not the grievances that had called them forth. By June's end, the mail braided itself back into something like order. But the line was changed. Riders kept a sharper eye on the horizons and the hollows. Keepers slept lighter. Dispatchers in St. Joseph and Sacramento read casualty notes between schedules and swore softly at the cost of each mile. In dime novels printed later, danger became a romance. In the moment, it was something else, a weight you carried in your chest alongside the rhythm of your mount's stride. Ask a man at a way station what he remembered of those weeks, and he might tell you about the look in a rider's eyes when the lantern flared and showed a face grimed with alkali and something like relief. He might mention the taste of stew eaten too quickly and the way hands shook when they tightened cinches. He might speak of the dead without names and the living with nicknames only, men who sat their saddles like they were born to them and rode into a chapter of history that would outlive them by a century and more. Above all, those days wrote a lesson that the Express never forgot. Speed is not only horseflesh and courage, It is a society's decision to keep a promise under stress. The company kept that promise with patched roofs and posted guards, with riders who took 2 runs when one should have broken them, and with a fort built where a river bent because the mail and the people who carried it needed a wall they could touch. The hoofbeats never truly stopped. They only changed tempo, stumbling and recovering, until the war's echo thinned and the line ran clear again. Poised for the next test, one measured not in arrows and smoke, but in pure time. For now, the rider who lived through those miles cinches down, swings up, and points his mustang into the dusk. The mocholo's weight is the same as yesterday's. The wrists have new names. He rides because the country needs minutes more than it needs men to spare, and because the oath he swore fits him like a second skin. Somewhere ahead, a station door will open. A keeper will step into the light, and the line, bloodied, stubborn, alive, will flow through them both. In the spring of 1861, the nation held its breath, counting days by rumors. States peeled away like bark, capitals traded telegrams like threats. And then, on March 4th, Abraham Lincoln stood beneath a cold sky in Washington City and spoke words a divided Union needed to hear. The text of his first inaugural, those careful pleas to the better angels of our nature, struck paper and wire at once, racing west by telegraph until the copper ended at the Missouri. After that, speed had only one shape: a boy on a hard-mouthed horse, the mochila locked. The promise was simple and impossible: get the new president's words to California faster than fear could curdle them. The line leaned forward as one organism. Clerks shaved ounces, keepers set out remounts like fuse caps. Riders cinched down and said less than men usually do before they gamble with their lives. The inaugural run showed what the Express was built to be. Station by station, the leather changed horses without changing tempo. Night did not slow it. Snow only sharpened it. Over the Platte and up the long, merciful ramp of South Pass, down into the basin where breath turns thin and distances get cruel, across the ragged Sierra where a horse can read granite better than a man. Somewhere between dawns, a keeper rehearsed the handoff with his hands in the air, the way a smith practices in the mind before he swings the hammer. When the rider came, the practice turned to muscle memory. Lift, lock, slap the rump, go. 10 days had been the boast. This time the line did better. In just over a week, 7 days and a thimbleful of hours by some reckonings, the president's words kissed the Sacramento, then crossed the last reach to San Francisco, where merchants, newspapermen, and men who wagered on faith or flour read them with an urgency that turned paper into power. The West did not learn its future from last month's news. It learned it from last week's breath. What did that speed buy? In a season when men counted loyalties like cartridges, it bought time. Time for California's union committees to print, argue, and rally. Time for merchants to steady contracts. Time for judges to pin law to the ground before it wriggled free. The Express could not stop war, but it could deny panic the extra days it needs to grow teeth. At banks along Montgomery Street, the ink on drafts dried with less tremor. On ranches, the talk by lamplight drew straighter lines between fact and the wild speculations that ride hard on the prairie wind. When the mail came on time, men believed other schedules might hold too. Trains, shipments, promises. Not every story that clustered around those rides was as tidy as a ledger. Take William Buffalo Bill Cody, showman of the later West, who swore across a lifetime of stages and interviews that he rode for the Express at 14, fast, fearless, a boy with dust for blood. He may have carried messages for freighters, may even have done a short relief in a pinch. The frontier was good at finding work for the willing. But the long, regular runs he told and retold until they hardened into myth? Historians split like seasoned wood on that question. Some say the dates don't give him enough years. Others allow that the line made room for small bodies if the grit inside was large enough. Out here, truth wears a trail's dust. You can see its shape, but no man claims to count each mote. The safer verdict is this: the Express made legends the way a forge makes sparks, and Cody caught more than his share. The economics under the romance were brutal arithmetic. At the start, postage ran dear, $5 for a half ounce, the kind of money that makes a clerk swallow before he writes a receipt. As the line found its legs and the company hunted more letters, rates fell, bit by bit, until a man with $1 could buy a place for his words on that leather-born covenant. Even so, the Express hemorrhaged cash. Grain for remounts, iron for shoes, wages for riders and keepers, timber for stations, rifles and tinware, and coffee by the sack. Every mile had a bill of sale. The outfit, Russell, Majors, and Waddle, had built an empire of freight before it built a skeleton of speed. It counted on a federal mail contract to tie the books together. Politics, a panic of banks, and the war's rough hands kept that blessing at arm's length. The pony carried America's breath, but it breathed hard itself. Philatelists would later make a reliquary of those months. Covers franked in a brave variety of adhesives and hand stamps. Some private expresses, piggybacking on the Great Relay. Some with the proud words Pony Express, like a brand. They are small, beautiful lies in one sense. These stamped rectangles, so clean, so permanent, when the truth was sweat, alkali, and hooves in the night. Yet they keep the shape of the miracle, a half ounce of intent traveling faster than any six-horse stage could dream. To hold one today is to feel the weight the mochila tried so hard to ignore. The inaugural run remains the story most often told because it marries symbol to feat. A new president's voice sent racing over a land about to test whether words can hold when muskets speak. But there were other dispatches that mattered as fiercely to the men who read them. Orders to shift regulars like chess pieces along the Western Department. Notices of contracts awarded for roadwork and depots that could level a town out of mud. News of bullion shipments and mint assays that could make or unmake a man's year. Letters from a wife newly arrived by steamer to a husband already gone up country. Come quick, the baby coughs. History is a long shelf of heavy volumes. Daily life is the note stuck in the flyleaf. The Express carried both and treated them with the same cold respect. The cadence of that respect was choreography more intricate than any waltz. A clerk at the St. Joseph office weighed the cantinas like he was weighing pennants. Telegraph operators upstream kept the inbound news moving as far west as the wire allowed, pausing only to rekey when the current stuttered. In Sacramento, riders raised blisters, bringing eastbound replies to meet the steamer schedule. Between, along the 180-odd stations, the choreography continued. A keeper broke ice on a trough. A blacksmith reset a shoe nailed on crooked by a man whose hands shook after a scare. A rider who had slept in a chair stood up into his next 40 miles without complaint because the nation had scheduled his courage for that hour. As spring tipped toward summer, a whisper gained body along the line. The wire was coming. Crews with poles and augers moved like insects west from Omaha and east from California, cutting a swath of destiny that rode neither saddle nor stage. For the men of the Express, this was both threat and promise. A telegraph could do in minutes what even their best rides did in days, but it could not deliver a ring, a banknote, a photograph, a lock of hair, or the physical comfort of an old familiar hand. The riders did not sneer at progress. They carried it in their bones. The inaugural run had proven the nation wanted news at the edge of breath. The wire would prove it wanted news at the speed of thought. The Express kept riding anyway, because until the two ends of copper kissed somewhere high in the mountains, the Republic's pulse still needed horses to carry it. If you'd asked a rider that June what he believed, he might have spat alkali, squinted at the horizon, and offered a creed in one sentence. As long as there's a gap, we'll cross it. The inaugural had given the West a taste of what it meant to live by current events instead of last month's memory. Merchants watched prices with something like precision. Politicians in San Francisco tilted their speeches to data measured in days instead of seasons. Editors wrote editorials that mattered when they hit the street. The country still bled at the seams, but at least those along the Pacific coast bled with knowledge in their hands, not rumors in their mouths. And so the writers kept their contracts with the clock. The inaugural lay behind them like a high water mark. Ahead lay lesser-known trips that mattered just as much to the people whose names were never printed. A mother reading that her son had lived through a winter in the diggings. A rancher learning that a market had shifted and his herd would fetch a fair price after all. A captain at Benicia Barracks unfolding orders that moved his company east. Messages moved a nation. The men who moved the messages were paid in cash, bruises, and the hard private knowledge that they had carried weight without dropping it. Somewhere tonight, a boy not long out of childhood slips the mochila across a fresh saddle, and points his horse toward the next lamp on the next horizon. Between the click of the key and the thud of the hoof lives a kind of faith. He rides inside it. By the autumn of 1861, the rumor had a body, and the body had bones. Poles rose out of the prairie like a procession of wooden crosses marching toward the horizon. Crews from the east and the west dug, lifted, tamped, and strung copper across the same valleys where riders leaned into weather, and the work moved with a conviction that made even the most hard-bitten station keeper fall quiet. Each day the gap narrowed, and with it the future approached, the kind of future that carries no saddle sores. The riders watched those lines the way old sailors watch a new rig take shape at the shipyard, with a grudging respect deepened by a private ache. Progress does not argue, it arrives. In late October, the two ends of wire found each other high in the interior, and a technician's hand closed a circuit that had been open since the Republic imagined itself coast to coast. The key chattered, and somewhere a clerk grinned because a message born in San Francisco shook hands with an office in the east before a horse could clear its throat. The news blew down the line ahead of the line. The wire is up. The wire is live. The wire wins. No stage driver, no freighter, no trail boss felt that sentence sharper than the boys of the Express. They did not curse it. They simply knew what it meant. 2 days later, the company posted what amounts to a frontier epitaph. The Pony Express would cease operations. The hoofbeats that had stitched two oceans into a 10-day promise would soon belong to memory and to men who still rode because riding was in their bones. But endings, like beginnings, do not occur all at once. There were final eastbound and westbound bags to clear, letters already paid for, hopes already tied with twine. So the riders did what they had always done. They ran. One last time, the clerks shaved weight nobody would miss, and the keepers set remounts like fuse caps along the road. One last time, boys who had learned to measure a night by the distance between lanterns tucked the leather over a waiting saddle and trusted strangers down the line to be exactly where duty said they would be. In those last rides, men hurried without pretense, steeled by the knowledge that they were carrying not only paper and ink, but the very rhythm of a vanishing craft. If you'd stood by the corral fence at Cold Springs or Devil's Gate and raised your hand in farewell, you might have seen something uncommon in a rider's eyes. Gratitude without bitterness, as if the work itself were a sacrament and the privilege had been simply to serve. On paper, the reason for the shutdown looked like arithmetic and wires. In truth, it was a long time coming. The outfit, Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express, had run on boldness and borrowed breath from the beginning. Grain, wages, timber, guns, leather, iron. Every mile consumed them without mercy. Postage that began at a painful $5 per half ounce fell to lure more letters, but even a buck could not teach copper pennies to become gold eagles. The promised federal mail contract hovered like a mirage over a hot road. Politics back east, a banking panic that soured credit, and the whirlwind of civil war conspired to keep signatures off the one document that might have made the Express solvent. Out here, men learned to ride lean and straight. On ledgers, the numbers puffed and stumbled. William Hepburn Russell, hungry, audacious, had bet the company on speed and on the government's need for a fast artery to the Pacific. His partners, Alexander Majors and William Waddell, knew how to move freight, feed animals, and fix a road with the nearest thing at hand. But even their prairie thrift had limits. Scandals nipped at Russell's heels back east and stained the balance sheets. Creditors gathered like thunderheads. When the wire made the calculus plain, the equation solved itself. Within months, the road, stations, rolling stock, and what remained of the line's contracts passed beneath the umbrella of Ben Holliday, the stagecoach king, whose overland stage company could spread costs over a wide, profitable web of routes. In time, even Holliday would sell. Wells Fargo's name would be stamped on what men had hammered into the earth with sweat and mules. But for the people who had kept the lamps lit at swing stations, those were high office transactions. They still had roofs to patch and animals to feed, and now they would do it for stages and for the comfort of passengers who admired the view. Riders scattered the way sparks fly when a shoe is nailed. Some fell into stage service as messengers or outriders. Some hired on as scouts for the army when the frontier's quarrels demanded men who knew draws, fords, and the particular language of wind over sage. A few pinned tin stars to their vests and walked towns into a kind of law. Others drifted to ranches, mines, or the end of a bar where a man can make peace with his knees and his memories. A handful saw their names collected in later years by newspapers and dime novels, hungry for a past that had the decency to fade just enough to be irresistible. A larger handful never learned they were part of history. They knew only that they had kept time's appointment as long as horses and a prayer could manage it. The stations changed character. A few remained waypoints for coaches, others folded back into the land, roofs sagging, walls chewed by wind. Families moved on or grew where they were planted, and someday a child would run a hand along the grooves worn in a station's doorway and ask why the wood felt like a riverstone. Men in a hurry, an old voice might answer. Some outposts became ranch houses, some foundations, and a story nobody could quite agree on. If you ride the route today in your mind, you can still place them. Little squares of human will against so much open. What of the mail itself? The telegraph swallowed dispatches and newsprint the way a coil of wire swallows current, but paper still needed carriages. The overland stages carried letters that were less urgent and much heavier than anything a mochila would tolerate, and in that slower wait the West found a new rhythm. No more 10-day miracles. Instead, a reliable drumbeat of coaches, guarded and scheduled, with room for passengers who could afford to ride inside progress instead of chasing it. In San Francisco, editors learned the luxury, if that is the word, of commenting on yesterday's events before supper, and merchants tallied losses and gains with a speed that made risk calculable. The Express had trained a nation to expect haste. The Wire taught it to expect immediacy. And yet, listen, if you stand in the space between telegraph and telephone, between stage and rail, you can hear how one handoff prepared the next. The line of poles was a relay as surely as the line of stations had been. Men at intervals keeping faith with a schedule, each depending on the next to take custody of the message before the minute turned. It is no insult to the Wire to say the riders made it possible. Their success demonstrated appetite. Their precision taught America how to live by a clock it could trust. By the time iron rails met at Promontory in '69, the nation had practiced believing in togetherness at speed. The Pony Express had been a rehearsal for modernity. Somewhere in those closing weeks, a keeper put out a lantern at dawn and did not relight it that night. He set his last entry in a ledger, ran a hand down the page, and closed the book on a world that had been small enough to know by hoof and horizon. A rider came that day, dismounted out of habit, and then laughed at himself because the habit had outlived the job by a breath. The two men shook hands, made a few remarks about whether they would soon stop reading as survival, and parted. Not long after, a letter crossed the same ground without them, faster than birds, invisible as an intention. To tell the truth about the end is to tell that nothing essential was lost that had not been born for the purpose of being spent. The Express was always a fuse, bright, brief, beautiful, lit to bridge a gap between slower certainties and a swifter age. It burned for 18 months and a handful of days and left behind ash you can still touch. A few saved covers with brave stamps, a line of broken chimneys in empty country, names in a paybook, and stories that make your throat tighten for reasons you cannot explain to people who have never counted miles by lanterns. It left behind, too, a lesson that a country can will itself into coherence if it is prepared to spend courage at every station along the way. So the Wire won, as it had to, but the hoofbeat remains, a rhythm in the nation's chest. When the key ticks, you can still hear it. Under the chatter, under the cleverness, an older sound, the sound of a good horse carrying words that matter. And in that sound, the riders go on, small in the saddle, large in their task, heads down against weather and chance, bound by an oath that made them, for a brief blaze of time, the fastest measure of a continent's heart. Every June, along lonely stretches of two-lane blacktop and sage country, riders in denim and dust gather where station houses once stood. A mochila, freshly tooled but faithful to the old pattern, slides from one saddle to another. There is ceremony in the simple lift and drop, in something like prayer in the way the buckles bite home. The horses stamp. A flag lifts in the wind. No one aims to outrun a telegraph now. The Wire won that race long ago. They ride so a nation remembers the feel of its own pulse. Memory came for the Pony Express quickly, almost as soon as the last lamp at a swing station was snuffed. Dime novelists had been sniffing around the frontier for years, and here was a tale tailor-made for ink. Boys with nerve and six-gun courage, a chain of lonely outposts, the stopwatch of a continent, printers in the East, Beetle and Adams and their rivals, dressed those months in broadcloth heroics and sent them back west as paper heroes. Audiences wanted heat, so the authors turned up the flame. Apache arrows like hailstorms, road agents behind every boulder, riders who never missed and never slept. It wasn't truth, but it was a kind of truth's shadow. Longer, cleaner, more dramatic than the men who cast it. Onto that stage stepped William Frederick Cody, Buffalo Bill, the greatest showman the frontier ever produced. In his Wild West exhibitions, he made speed a spectacle and distance a stage cue. A rider burst from the wings. A mochila bright as a carnival prize flashed from saddle to saddle, and the crowd rose because they recognized the feeling, even if they'd never seen the real thing. The miracle of message made flesh. Historians will keep arguing about how much Pony Express Cody truly wrote as a boy, but his theater won a verdict larger than fact. He taught the country how to imagine the ride, and sometimes imagination is the strongest courier of all. Then the movies took their turn. Silent reels flickered frontier grit across Nickelodeons. Mid-century pictures planted thunder in the aisles with horses that never tired and heroes with cheekbones like geography. Directors loved the choreography of the mochila, the lift, the lock, the spur, the cloud of dust that stood in for everything America wanted to believe about itself. Lean, fast, brave, a promise kept on time. If those films sanded down the splinters, less alkali in the eyes, fewer nights where a man shivered and did not know if the lantern ahead meant safety or a trap, that was the price of myth. The hoofbeats carried into living rooms, then into classrooms, and finally into a consensus. The Pony Express mattered because it dared. Museums gathered the pieces that remained, a cracked cantina lock, a pay book with names lined like fence posts, a station ledger with grease stains where stew and news shared the same table. In St. Joseph, a carriage house became a shrine to the first gallop. Out along the trail, county historical societies guarded adobe bricks as if they were gold. The National Park Service traced the line on modern maps and called it a National Historic Trail. Road signs with a stylized rider point out where memory and asphalt touch. Children peer at a saddle not much larger than the ones hanging in feed stores today, and their parents read an oath that still stings with clarity: guard the mail, keep sober, ride. Even the post office paid its respects. Commemorative stamps, clean, bright, almost too tidy for the work they honor, fold history into a square you can thumb. The images never show the long miles where nothing happens except everything important. A horse's breathing, a rider's eyes combing the dark, a horizon that refuses to come closer until suddenly it's at your knee. Collectors will tell you watermarks and gum matter. Writers would tell you minutes do. Of course, legend takes liberties. It forgets how short the enterprise was, 18 months and a handful of days, and how often the job looked less like heroics and more like a farmer's patience. Feed, shoe, mend, check the cinch again. It turns the messy politics of a crowded frontier into a duel at 20 paces. It prefers a single-named hero to the aggregate courage of men and women who kept gates latched, oats dry, and rifles near. Yet there is a reason the myth sticks where other legends slide off. The Pony Express is one of those rare machines whose function and symbol are the same. What it did, carry words faster than fear, perfectly matches what it means. Stand at a site where a station once breathed and you can still read the old country. The wind is an archivist. It brings back the smell of horses and tallow if you stand long enough. A groove in a doorway fits a thumb the way it did when a keeper leaned there, listening for a distant drumming. A lonely cottonwood throws a shape that might be a rider approaching. Then you hear a truck on the highway, and the spell breaks. The present has a right to its noise. But close your eyes and the hoofbeat returns, and with it the sensation the express delivered in its parcels as surely as any letter. We are not alone at the far edge of the map. Someone is coming with news. What finally does the Pony Express teach? That speed is a moral choice as much as a mechanical achievement. Men decided to string faith across 2,000 miles, faith that a stranger would be in place, that a horse would hold its feet, that an oath could outlast fear. That decision, repeated at every door and every draw, stitched a nation closer. The wire took over because it could multiply that choice by 1,000 and make minutes into seconds. The rails followed and multiplied it again. But the architecture, stations, handoffs, the discipline of time, was frontier practice elevated to national habit. Every network since has borrowed the posture: lean forward, reduce weight, trust the next hand. There is one more lesson the writers left unspoken, maybe because it was stitched into their bones and didn't need saying. Courage is most useful when it is ordinary. No trumpets, no banners, only a schedule, a saddle, and a road that asks you to keep going when night turns the sage into teeth. The names we remember: Pony Bob Haslam, the nameless keepers burned out of stations, the boys who rode too far because someone had to, are not saints of spectacle. They are saints of the small hour. America has always been built in those minutes. So if you find yourself in St. Joseph or Carson Valley or Old Sacramento, follow a sign with a rider on it. Step into a cool museum room and put your palm on a saddle worn shiny where a small body leaned in to win. Step outside and find the horizon. Ask yourself the question the Express put to everyone who ever counted on it. What promise would you keep at a gallop? What message would you carry through weather and doubt because someone on the far shore needs it before fear grows teeth? Share your own frontier. What distance did you cross to keep a promise? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe if this ride carried you. And if you ever hear hoofbeats under the hum of the present, tip your hat toward the empty road. Somewhere in the nation's long memory, a boy leans forward over a mustang's neck, the mochila locked, the oath tight as a cinch. He rides, still.